What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors sits down across from one of daytime television's most opinionated and unflinchingly confident hosts? On paper, it sounds like a ratings dream, star power meeting mainstream media polish in a controlled, friendly environment designed for light banter and viral sound bites. But sometimes, when two strong personalities collide under the unforgiving glare of live television, control slips away, expectations shatter, and something far more raw and unforgettable emerges. This was supposed to be a routine interview, the kind viewers have seen hundreds of times before, a famous actor promoting a new project, a seasoned host guiding the conversation with rehearsed warmth, carefully timed laughter, and questions vetted by producers long before the cameras rolled. The studio lights were bright, the audience was primed to applaud, and the opening smiles suggested nothing more than another polished segment destined to fade quietly into the archives of daytime TV. But from the moment the actor took his seat, there was a subtle tension in the air, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. This was not a man known for playing by the rules. Throughout his career, he had built a reputation for defying expectations, challenging authority, and speaking with a candor that often made publicists nervous. He was celebrated for his talent, but equally infamous for his refusal to sanitize his thoughts for the sake of comfort or convenience. The host, meanwhile, was no stranger to controversy herself. Beloved by many and criticized by others, she had carved out a space in daytime television by being outspoken, assertive, and unapologetically direct. Her audience trusted her to ask the questions others wouldn't, to push back when answers felt rehearsed, and to maintain control of the conversation no matter who sat across from her. This was her territory, her stage, and she had handled far bigger egos before, or so it seemed. As the interview began, the exchange felt polite enough, a few jokes landed, the audience laughed on cue, compliments were exchanged, and the actor spoke briefly about his latest film. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. The host's questions began to probe a little deeper, edging toward personal territory. The actor's answers grew less polished, more reflective, tinged with an intensity that didn't quite fit the cheerful daytime format. Then came the moment when everything changed, a seemingly simple question, one that might have passed unnoticed in another interview. Hit a nerve, the actor paused, the smile faded, and instead of offering a safe, digestible response, he spoke honestly. Painfully honestly, he questioned the industry, the media, and the very format of the show itself. His words were sharp, emotional, and unscripted, cutting through the studio like a blade. The host, clearly caught off guard, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. She interrupted, reframed, and challenged his perspective. What followed was not a debate carefully managed by producers, but a real confrontation unfolding in real time. Voices rose, body language shifted. The audience fell silent, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or simply watch in stunned disbelief. This was no longer an interview. It was a clash of worldviews. The actor accused the media of oversimplifying complex human experiences, of turning pain into spectacle and authenticity into branding. The host pushed back, defending her platform, her intentions, and the expectations of her audience. Each interruption only fueled the fire, and each attempt at control seemed to slip further away. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled. Commercial breaks were delayed. Cue cards were ignored. What was meant to be a neatly packaged segment had transformed into something chaotic, uncomfortable, and utterly captivating. Millions of viewers watching live realized they were witnessing something rare, an unscripted breakdown of the carefully maintained illusion that live television is always under control. When the segment finally ended, the atmosphere in the studio was heavy. The applause was hesitant, the smiles forced, the actor left the stage without the usual pleasantries, and the host struggled to regain her composure as the show moved on, but the real explosion came afterward. Clips of the confrontation spread across social media within minutes. Headlines screamed about meltdowns, ambushes, and career-ending moments. Some praised the actor for his honesty and courage, calling it a brave stand against a shallow media machine. Others criticized him for being disrespectful, unstable, or unprofessional. The host, too, found herself under intense scrutiny, praised by some for standing her ground, condemned by others for provoking the situation. What was undeniable, however, was this. People were talking. In an era where most celebrity interviews feel interchangeable and sanitized, this moment stood out precisely because it was messy, uncomfortable, and real. It exposed the fragile balance between authenticity and performance, between control and chaos, that defines modern media. This wasn't just a confrontation between an actor and a host. It was a collision between art and commerce, honesty and image, unpredictability and control. And once it went off the rails, there was no putting it back. You weren't just watching an interview. You were witnessing one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on live television. A moment so intense that it seemed to shatter the very structure of daytime television itself. A moment that began like countless celebrity interviews before it, but ended in stunned silence, confusion, and a studio audience unsure whether they had just witnessed television history or television catastrophe. This was not merely another awkward exchange or heated disagreement destined to be forgotten by the next news cycle. This was the kind of confrontation that watched, dissected, argued overlong after the cameras stopped rolling. When Charlie Sheen took his seat across from Joy Behar, few expected anything out of the ordinary. Both were veterans of public controversy in their own ways. Sheen, the unpredictable Hollywood star whose life and career had unfolded loudly and unapologetically in the public eye. Behar, the sharp-tongued, politically outspoken host known for her confidence, her quick wit, and her refusal to back down from confrontation. On the surface, it looked like a match made for ratings, not rupture. The conversation began as planned, light remarks, familiar laughter, a controlled environment where boundaries are usually understood, if not explicitly stated. But as the discussion shifted toward Sheen's past behavior, public image, and the media's treatment of his personal struggles, something changed. His responses grew sharper, less rehearsed, more confrontational. He no longer seemed interested in playing the role of the repentant celebrity or the self-aware punchline. Instead, he turned the spotlight outward. What followed was a verbal pivot that no producer could have anticipated. Sheen questioned not only how he had been portrayed, but who benefited from that portrayal. He challenged the moral authority of the media figures who, in his view, profited from condemning him while claiming the high ground. His tone was calm but relentless, each sentence landing with deliberate precision. Joy Behar attempted to interrupt, to redirect the conversation back towards safer territory, but the dynamic had shifted. The usual rhythm of host and guest was gone. In its place stood two opposing forces, neither willing to yield. As Behar pressed him on accountability, Sheen pushed back on consistency. As she framed her questions around responsibility, he reframed them around hypocrisy. The studio grew noticeably quiet. Sheen accused media personalities of selectively applying outrage, of condemning certain behaviors while excusing or ignoring others when it suited their narratives. He spoke not just about himself, but about a system he claimed thrived on moral performance rather than moral principle. The words were uncomfortable, not explosive in volume, but devastating in implication. Behar, visibly unsettled, defended her role, her platform, and her record. She asserted that asking difficult questions was part of her responsibility, but each defense seemed only to fuel Sheen's critique. He wasn't attacking her personally, he insisted. He was challenging what she represented. That distinction did little to ease the tension. As the exchange intensified, the careful illusion of control that defines daytime television began to crack. This was no longer a conversation moving toward a tidy conclusion. This was a confrontation unfolding in real time, unscripted and irreversible. The audience shifted in their seats. Applause cues went unanswered. The energy in the room turned heavy, almost claustrophobic. Then came the breaking point. After one final exchange, sharp, unresolved, and emotionally charged, Joy Behar stood up, not dramatically, not angrily. Just decisively, the cameras struggled to adjust. For a brief moment, no one seemed certain what was happening. She offered no closing remark, no transitional joke, no reassuring smile. She simply walked off the set. The silence that followed was deafening. Whether interpreted as protest, shock, or self-preservation, the gesture spoke louder than any argument. In that instant, the the interview ceased to be about Charlie Sheen alone. It became about power, control, and the limits of public discourse. The show moved on awkwardly, but the damage, real or perceived, had already been done. In the hours that followed, speculation exploded. Commentators debated whether Sheen had exposed hypocrisy or merely exploited confrontation. Supporters argued that he had dismantled the carefully curated credibility of a media figure who thrived on judgment. Critics claimed he had crossed a line, turning an interview into a personal crusade. Behar's supporters framed her exit as a refusal to legitimize what they saw as manipulation. Others saw it as an admission of defeat. Social media amplified every interpretation. Clips were replayed endlessly, slowed down, annotated, recontextualized. Body language experts weighed in. Headlines grew more dramatic with each passing hour. Some framed it as humiliation, others as misunderstanding. Some even claimed it marked the end of an era, a symbolic collapse of the polished certainty that daytime television had long relied upon. What was clear, however, was this: the moment struck a nerve. It tapped into a growing public frustration with performative outrage, selective accountability, and media figures who present themselves as arbiters of truth while remaining insulated from scrutiny. Whether one agreed with Sheen or not, his refusal to stay within the expected boundaries forced an uncomfortable reckoning. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a collision between chaos and control, between a man who thrived on unpredictability and a system built on managing it. And by the time it ended, nothing felt neatly resolved. No winner was declared, no narrative fully reclaimed, only the lingering sense that something had broken on live television in front of millions, and that there was no easy way to put it back together. Make sure to subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think really pushed Joy over the edge, because what you're about to see will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about The View. This wasn't just a heated exchange or a fleeting moment of television drama. This was the kind of incident that forces audiences to reevaluate the carefully polished image of daytime talk shows and the people who run them. A moment that, once it happened, could never be unseen or unheard. It all started like any other Tuesday morning at the View Studios in New York. The city was already alive with its usual rhythm: taxis weaving through traffic, pedestrians clutching coffee cups, and producers hustling through studio doors with headsets in place. Inside the building, everything followed a familiar routine. Crew members adjusted lighting rigs, makeup artists applied finishing touches, stage managers reviewed cue cards. The audience filed in, chatting casually, unaware that they were about to witness something far outside the norm. On the surface, nothing felt unusual. The hosts exchanged pleasantries backstage, joking the way colleagues do before the cameras turn on. The set gleamed under studio lights, designed to project warmth, authority, and effortless confidence. This was a show built on predictability, strong opinions delivered within controlled boundaries, controversy packaged neatly between commercial breaks. No one expected those boundaries to collapse. As the broadcast began, the tone was exactly what viewers had come to expect. Opening remarks were sharp but familiar. The panel eased into the day's topics with practiced ease. Applause cues landed right on time. Everything suggested another standard episode that would blend seamlessly into the show's long history. Then the guest arrived. At first, the conversation stayed safely on track. The questions were measured. The responses seemed cooperative, but subtle shifts began to emerge, changes so slight they could easily be missed. A pause held just a second too long, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, a response that veered off script rather than circling back to a rehearsed talking point. Slowly, the atmosphere changed. What was meant to be a discussion began to feel more like a challenge. The guest spoke with a confidence that didn't seek approval. He questioned assumptions instead of answering them. Rather than accepting the framing of the conversation, he dismantled it piece by piece, turning questions back on the panel. The audience sensed it first. Laughter became hesitant. Applause faded. People leaned forward in their seats, unsure whether to react or simply observe. This wasn't the usual performative disagreement that daytime television thrives on. This felt real, unfiltered, and uncomfortable. Joy Behar, known for her composure and sharp control of the conversation, attempted to reassert authority. She interrupted, she reframed, she challenged, but the usual tools weren't working. Each attempt to steer the discussion back into familiar territory only seemed to push it further off course, and that's when the tension became unmistakable. The guest didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or insult. Instead, he spoke calmly, methodically, pointing out contradictions, revisiting past statements, and questioning the moral certainty with which opinions were delivered on the show. The critique wasn't personal, at least not on the surface, but it was piercing. It struck at the foundation of the show's credibility and the role its hosts played as cultural arbiters. The cameras kept rolling. Producers backstage scrambled. There were hushed conversations over headsets. Fingers hovered over buttons meant for commercial breaks that never came. This wasn't in the rundown. There was no contingency plan for what was unfolding. Joy's body language changed. Her posture stiffened. Her expressions tightened. For a moment, she appeared to be weighing her options. Push harder, disengage, or shut it down entirely. The control she had exercised for years was slipping, and the audience could feel it. Then came the moment no one expected. Without a dramatic outburst or closing statement, Joy stood up. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. Cameras hesitated, unsure whether to follow. The other hosts froze, caught between continuing the show and reacting to what was happening in front of them. Joy walked off the set. The studio fell into a stunned silence that felt heavier than any argument. No music played. No applause followed. The carefully choreographed rhythm of the show collapsed into confusion. What had just happened didn't fit into any familiar television narrative. In that instant, viewers at home realized they were watching something unprecedented, not because of shouting or spectacle, but because of what it symbolized: a loss of control, a refusal to continue. A breaking point reached live in real time in front of millions. After the broadcast, the fallout was immediate. Clips flooded social media. Comment sections exploded with speculation. Some viewers praised the guest for exposing what they saw as hypocrisy. Others defended Joy, arguing that walking away was an act of principle, not weakness. Media commentators debated whether the moment marked a shift in how audiences perceived daytime television and its authority. One question dominated every discussion. What really pushed Joy over the edge? Was it the challenge to her credibility, the refusal to play by the show's unspoken rules? Or was it something deeper, a realization that the power dynamic she relied on had momentarily vanished? Whatever the answer, one thing became clear. This wasn't just another episode of The View. It was a moment that forced viewers to reconsider the line between performance and authenticity, between control and vulnerability. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The producers had booked Charlie Sheen for what they fully expected to be a standard promotional interview for his latest project. On paper, it was a familiar formula, one that daytime television had perfected over decades. A controversial but recognizable celebrity appears on the show, speaks about upcoming work, shares a few light anecdotes, and addresses past headlines just enough to appear reflective without reopening old wounds. Ratings get a small boost, the guest gets exposure, and everyone walks away satisfied. At least that was the plan. Behind the scenes, the booking was seen as a calculated risk, not a gamble. Charlie Sheen was unpredictable, yes, but he was also experienced in navigating interviews. He had been in front of cameras for most of his life. Producers believed they understood how to manage him, how to frame questions, how to steer conversations, and how to cut away if things drifted too far off course. There was confidence that any rough edges could be smoothed out within the controlled environment of The View. Joy Behar, however, viewed the booking differently. Known for her sharp tongue, quick wit, and unapologetic willingness to challenge guests, Joy was particularly excited about this interview. To her, this wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It was an opportunity. Charlie Sheen represented a larger conversation she felt strongly about. Fame without accountability, behavior excused by talent, and a Hollywood culture that too often rewarded controversy instead of confronting it. In the days leading up to the show, Joy prepared diligently. She reviewed clips of Sheen's past interviews, revisited headlines from his most turbulent years, and rewatched viral moments that had shaped public perception of him. His infamous public statements, his clashes with the media, his unapologetic attitude during periods when many expected remorse. To Joy, these weren't just tabloid footnotes, they were evidence of a pattern. She crafted pointed questions designed not merely to inform but to challenge. What responsibility did he feel for his influence on fans? Did he believe Holly would have enabled his behavior? Had he ever genuinely reflected on the impact of his words and actions beyond his own career? These were not questions meant to flatter or entertain. They were meant to provoke accountability. Producers were aware of Joy's approach and largely supported it. After all, The View thrived on strong opinions and spirited debate. Its identity was built on the idea that no topic, or guest, was above scrutiny. From their perspective, Joy's preparation aligned perfectly with the show's brand. A little tension was good television. A little confrontation kept audiences engaged. What no one anticipated was just how prepared Charlie Sheen was as well. While Joy sharpened her questions, Sheen was forming his own strategy, not to defend himself in the traditional sense, but to refuse the premise of the conversation altogether. He had spent years being dissected by commentators, moralized by critics, and reduced to caricature by headlines. By the time he walked into the studio, he had no intention of playing the role that had been written for him. When Charlie arrived at the studio that morning, he appeared calm, almost disarmingly so. He greeted staff politely, made small talk, and showed no visible signs of defensiveness. To some, it seemed like a good omen. Perhaps this really would be a smooth interview after all. But beneath that calm exterior was resolve. As the cameras prepared to roll, Joy sat at the table, notes carefully organized, questions mentally rehearsed. She was confident. This was her arena. She had challenged politicians, celebrities, and public figures far more powerful than Sheen. She believed firmly in her ability to control the conversation and hold her ground. The interview began exactly as expected. Introductions were cordial. Charlie spoke briefly about his latest project, offering just enough enthusiasm to satisfy the promotional aspect of the segment. The audience applauded. The panel nodded along. Everything appeared to be unfolding according to plan. Then Joy shifted gears. She moved from the present to the past, from promotion to scrutiny. Her tone remained conversational, but the questions became sharper, more direct. She referenced his controversies, his public outbursts, his reputation. She framed them as necessary context rather than personal attacks, confident that this framing would keep the exchange balanced. Charlie listened quietly. When he responded, he didn't deny his past. He didn't apologize either. Instead, he questioned the purpose of revisiting it. He asked why certain narratives were endlessly recycled while others were ignored. He challenged the idea that he owed explanations to media figures who had profited from his lowest moments. The dynamic shifted. Joy pushed harder, pressing him on responsibility and influence. Charlie pushed back, not defensively, but philosophically. He spoke about hypocrisy, about selective outrage, about how public figures were judged differently depending on whether they fit an approved narrative. His tone was controlled, almost clinical, which only made his words more unsettling. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. Joy realized that Charlie wasn't responding to her questions. He was reframing them. He wasn't accepting her authority as interviewer. He was treating her as part of the system he was critiquing. The conversation was slipping out of the neat structure she had prepared so carefully, and that was the moment everything began to unravel. What had started as a routine booking, one rooted in promotion and predictable confrontation, was rapidly transforming into something far more volatile. The balance of power was shifting, and no one at the table seemed entirely sure how to stop it. For the producers watching from backstage, it became clear that this was no longer a standard interview. It was the beginning of a collision.